bad, but it can also be considered accepting or rejecting positive or negative. Value, like the word, a related cognate word valence, talks about something on, let's say, we talk about, valences in chemistry as something positive or negative charge. You can think of value in that context too. It's something, is it good or is it bad? We call things good or bad. The value judgments are, of course, subjective. They aren't anything inherent about any situation. It's just how we feel about it, how we think. Hence the word judgment. It's just our position on something that happens. So, give you a few examples here in a minute, but another key idea, key thing to keep in mind is any value judgment, to call anything good or bad, implies there is some basis, a reason, some kind of, you have a protocol in your head, an algorithm or something says, I label this as good or bad based on something, and that basis is going to be a key part of the story as we continue here tonight. So here's just to make this a little more tangible. What are some of the things which we typically would say, this is good, this is great, this is wonderful, this is positive? Well, you get a promotion at work. Your car starts when it's 15 below. Am I going to get home, or am I going to get to the okay, no, nothing on the MRI. I remember that one when they did one of my head when I was having migraines, and the guy said, yeah, we did an MRI of your head and we didn't find anything. It was encouraging, I think, but I don't know if they meant it that way. There's somebody in the meeting, that, okay, this is good. This guy's, this is great. Daughter's engaged to somebody really good. Or your neighbor with the who starts his diesel pickup truck at 5 o'clock every morning and lets it warm up for 20 minutes. Steve is laughing like he's got that neighbor. Harper, see. Yeah, and he gets transferred to Trenton. So these are all things which are likely to be great. And on the other side of the coin, things that are likely to be bad is you don't get the promotion, but some incompetent coworker gets promoted ahead of you. The car doesn't start. AAA says they'll be there in half an hour, but it's an hour and a half and you missed your appointment that's been booked for 6 months. Stuff like that. So this is more than bad. This is where words come up that we might not use elsewhere. You get a positive on it, show something you got to deal with, some issue. Your flight gets canceled, but not for your baggage. That ends up in Omaha anyway. You don't go anyplace. You're still in the airport, but someplace you find out a week later that your stuff is actually in Omaha. And it's not your jerk neighbor that gets sent to Trenton. It's you get transferred to Trenton. So this is bad news. So these are the type of thing I'm talking about. And two things to note about these. One is circumstances that happen to us. Not so much, I'm talking today about these choices of life. We get a lot of exhortation and needful exhortation about choosing the hard way, not getting sucked up into materialism, the easy life. Not really talking about that type of good and bad of things, our way of life. It's just stuff that happens to us that we tend to label good or bad. The two overlap a little bit, but I'm really talking about stuff that happens to us. The other important point to remember is that anything we call it good and bad is I'm only concerned with the value judgment part. We're not saying that something might be inconvenient, something might be painful, something might be costly, something might be a nuisance, something might be embarrassing. There's all kinds of other things. It's the label we put on those. We get the value judgment. There's a big story about value judgments here, about why we even have them in our life. Where they come from, why do we make them? What's the basis? That's what we're getting at here. So let's look at a little biblical history of value judgments, because it's not just to say psychological, emotional thing. This is primarily a theological issue. It's not primarily, there's a big psychological component to it, but this is a theological issue. So what is the first value judgment? Give you hints in Genesis 1. Where do you think it comes from? The very first value judgment is where? It's only 4 verses into Genesis, where God calls the light good. That is a value judgment, and I'll explain why in a moment. It doesn't stop there, as you know. There's 6 other places, 6 places where God saw some aspect of creation, which is good. And then finally, at the end of everything, the whole united working together, the harmony, the environmental synthesis of everything, he says, this is very good. It's just good stuff. Those are value judgments. So the question is, or what some questions we start asking about this is, some questions you should be asking are, number one, how do these statements fit in the creation account? What do they do? Do they advance the work? In other words, is anything created or separated or moved as all other God's activities are when God says he saw something and it was good? Well, it doesn't. The important point is those statements could be eliminated entirely from Genesis, and you'd still have exactly the same creation account. There could be maybe just one at the end where God says, God made everything, this is very good. But it's repeated, insisted that what God made was good, as if it could be otherwise. But the point I want us to think about is those category of what type of statement that is amidst all these other statements about God said this, let this happen, this was created, God made this, God put this here. All activities, but these statements do no work, they do not advance the work, and they don't add progress to the work. But what do they add? They're there for a reason. It adds something. And again, I don't know if I'm going to answer this fully right now, but it's important to think about these statements as seeing these value judgments that God makes are there not to deal with what happened, but to add an overlay to what happened called a valuation. Not an evaluation, a valuation. There, God is putting a value, a positive value, in this case, because God says it was good. And the same question I posed a few minutes ago, anytime you think about a value judgment, you have to ask the question, what is the basis for God declaring that that was good? This might seem pretty obvious. It's good because God just made it and it came out. Obviously, it wasn't going to be bad. Was anything that God created not good? Does the word evil show up, or bad, or flawed? No, nothing like that shows up. But was there anything not good? So again, you ask the question: if everything is good, what's the point of saying all this? And we'll find out. There's a couple points. One is that God makes value judgments. Value judgments are the territory of God. We're going to visit that a little later, many times. This is strictly the territory of God. These statements, like I said, these are called value judgments. So that's all good. Literally, it's all good. Where is the first place we find something that is not good or evil. Well, it's in the knowledge, the tree of good and evil. That's the first time we come across this. So now we learn that everything that God made was good, but there's an opposite. There's something else that is there. We don't know what, but good and evil shows up. It's in the context of what God has already said. Another kind of really important theological point here is the tree of knowledge of good and evil shows up after God has already said, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good. That's one of the contexts. So far, everything has been good, and in toto and together it was very good. There was one thing, however, that was labeled not good. It's not evil, but it was labeled not good. And you probably remember that. That was the man that God made was without a mate among all the pairs of animals, male and female created them, but there was not a female for Adam, and God said, it's not good the man should be alone, so he remedied that. That situation was not good. It was not, like, let me get this, let me get my tongue lined up here, right? It was not evil, but it was not good. He used the word not good rather than evil. Okay. So the first mention of actually the word, Hebrew word evil or English, is in when the tree of knowledge of good and evil is introduced. That's the first place, first mention of that. It comes in, it's introduced, and it's introduced with, I would say, a wrinkle. Everything God made was good, including this. It's the knowledge of good and evil. There's something that's the opposite of good. No one knows what it is. If you can imagine you're a first-time reader, it's really hard to read Genesis this way. But stuff we're so familiar with, but you really want to say, wait a minute, everything is good, but now there's something called good and evil. Evil's never been mentioned. You have no idea what it means, except it's something that's both the opposite of good, and it's something that's a different kind of evil than Adam being alone, because that was just not good. That was not evil. So there's something else here. And then God says, no, you can't go there. It's not for you. It's there, but it's forbidden. It's out of your what they say, stay in your lane. You don't belong here. This is forbidden. So the next question I think that comes up is why? What's the purpose of any prohibition? If God prohibits this, there's got to be a reason. You take any prohibition. Here's a common one you'll see: no jumping, no diving, no passing, no speeding, no, don't walk on the grass. Don't. We live out here when we go hiking in the mountains, and you will, especially when you get up to very high elevations in the tundra zone, over 10, 12,000 feet, and extremely fragile and slow growing ecosystem up there. You don't step on anything out there. You stay on the trail, you stay in your lane, and there's signs. Do not, you step on a plant, it might be 50 years until that thing grows back, and it's only this high. Well, just to protect it. So safety of the plant, safety of you. This sign here is obviously for your safety. There could be prohibitions for courtesy. That is, this is for somebody else. This section of the lake is reserved for boaters, let's say. Security. I don't know how that would be an issue in Genesis, but that could be a reason to establish some kind of order. Line up here, don't go here. We have to keep everybody in the right spot. Line starts here, not here. Oops. Verifying obedience. That's clearly one that comes to mind when we talk about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's often said it's a test of their obedience to see whether they obey God or trust God. And that certainly is a part of it. I'm going to go a different direction, but that's certainly not to be ignored. So you got, oh, that was backwards. Forwards, okay. So what was God's purpose? It wasn't for their safety, the tree, it wasn't poisonous, it wasn't courtesy, nobody else is around there that they have to share it with. It's like, there's some purpose there, and we're going to look into that. Was the prohibition connected? Was it something inherent about the tree itself? Or was it something inherent in this about the command? Like, don't eat this tree because this tree has some whatever. It tastes bad. I don't know. It was one of the best. It was the best tree that was out there. So that's another question to look at. Yeah, did God was there something special, or, and obviously this is where I'm going, or did it become a symbolic tree because it was off limits? And I'm going to say the tree of knowledge of good and evil was just another really nice tree in the garden. There was nothing, absolutely nothing special about its fruit, except it was enticing. It smelled good. You saw it was good. It was a really nice looking tree. We don't have any information about the aroma, the smell of just standing there with, ooh, boy, that's tasty. That's likely. She saw it was good for food. But you can get carried away with that. But what's Genesis is, if we follow this theme of God making a restriction, God saying everything is good, this tree is good, but it's got something about it that I'm labeling it good now and evil. I'm introducing this idea. And because it's forbidden, like you can't go there, there's a reason why I'm doing that. And because I have set that reason, now that makes this tree something special. There's nothing, say, inherent about the tree itself, but its fact that it's restricted becomes its, let's say, it's a calling card here. So a few more questions to ask before we get to the punchline here. How are we doing on time? What's the time?
Yes.
Okay, we're moving fast. Okay. Have to back up a little bit. I've talked about good and evil. These words, which together occur nearly 1,000 times in the Hebrew text, just a rough approximation, counting inches in a concordance. I was going to count each one, but it's about 500, a little more over 500 where the word evil occurs, and maybe 400 plus for the word good. Multiple meanings. It could mean something physically bad happening, something essentially pleasurable that's good, something material. But is it moral? Yes, it's used for moral. It's used for spiritual. These words are, say, the word evil is abundant. Just to get a flavor of it, if you look at Jeremiah 48, I think that word shows up about at least 15 times, and about half of them are about the evil of the Israelites. That Jeremiah says, you did evil, God will bring evil on you. And of course, the evil is the captivity and the destruction of their country. So it's used in these two ways. They're connected, but it can be for discomfort. A lot of, you just scan down the entries in concordance, and you can see, like many Hebrew words, it's got a wide range of what we call wide semantic range. Good can be used, I will do good for you. It's God's blessing. It could be abundance. It could be about right behavior, doing right, good thinking. So there's a little bit of ambiguity here in your left. Good and evil. Well, what was good? So if everything was good, it was good because God made it. It was good because It was moving forward toward God's purpose. It was good because it was pleasant, all the things. So there's a lot of ideas floating around here. I'd say it's loose ends. Let's say there's a lot of loose ends so far. And then there's this tree that has something about evil, but you can't eat it. Why not? It's not stated. So a logical next question, if there is a prohibition, which sense of those would it be appropriate for Adam and Eve to not know about? If God says that you can't know this kind, there's this tree of knowledge, but you can't know about it, which sense? And that's not so easy to, well, they certainly would have known what pain was if they, walking through the forest and they whack into a log or something, but probably something more in the moral sense. But I think that the answer comes as we move ahead. But it's, again, another one of these questions you have to ask. What kind of good and evil is God talking about here? The ambiguity of the word, the concept, is going to be another of these key issues as the narrative unfolds, because as it turns out, God kind of meant one thing, but when they ate, it turned out to be something else. So this prohibition, or say this limitation, now I'm going to change the word prohibition now to limitation. And that's going to be a key word here. There's a context. God had already provided abundantly for them. He'd given them so many trees to eat from. It was not a matter of them being hungry. There's plenty there. But what's going on here? And this is there's two key words that I hope you remember from tonight. One is this, well, limited, limitless. This is one idea. That this becomes a symbol. The tree, the prohibition, is a symbol, a tangible symbol for Adam and Eve to understand that God is limitless. They are limited. They were created, they had a beginning, they don't have all divine knowledge and so forth. They are limited, and this is the basis for their relationship to God. So we are the created, you are the creator. It's the basis for our relationships, the basis for anything. So it starts here. There's one God and I'm not it, kind of idea. And if you put it in the context or describe that with the word limitation as being another way of saying prohibition, the tree is limited. It's off limits because you are limited people. And to demonstrate this to you, I'm going to take one arbitrary tree and say, just don't go there. That's for you to understand that I have no limits. I'm the creator. You are limited. And if you can understand that, then we have a basis to begin our relationship. So the tree of knowledge, what it represents is the state of affairs, the relationship between Adam and Eve as limited created beings and God, the unlimited creator being.
David, I think I remember in your book, and you mentioned it briefly in your comments, but you had said that Adam and Eve had to learn an important lesson. One was that there was a God, and two was that they weren't God.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And
that just really struck that stuck with me for a long time. And that's sort of what you're talking about here with the limitless and the limited?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. This idea of, say, just take the word, the prohibition, do not eat, and frame that as God limited Adam and Eve to demonstrate to them that they are limited creatures. I make the limits, you follow the limits. That's the beginning of our relationship. Of everything else that would happen, of our trust in God and faith and everything else, need for God starts with God is God, and by definition, God is limitless. God's a creator, and we are not that. then we have this position before God. So the good and evil now, we can interpret it, say, well, what was evil? Eating it was the evil. Why has evil not been mentioned in Genesis 4? Because this, you could say, this situation hasn't risen. But if they eat it, that's evil. If they abstain, that's good. This is the sense of good and evil when it talks about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, as we know, the respect for this limitation was not maintained. And God's estimation of this situation was, well, the humans now know good and evil. They become like one of us. But really, did Adam and Eve become like God? They became, something changed, something happened. Their eyes were open, and so forth. But were they eternal? No. Were they omnipotent? No. Were they omniscient like God? Were they omnipresent? No, they're not God. Okay. So are they, do they have the characteristics of God? Merciful? No, you're human beings, but you have transgressed this symbol of relationship and obtained the, we'll just say, knowledge of good and evil, but in a human context. You're human. So there's a real problem here, because as we saw earlier in Genesis, God said this was good. God's value judgments, knowing good, this is God's business, not your business. So we have this predicament, a dilemma, you might say the point of, if this was not if was, just in terms of literature, or what I'd call that, the climax of, you got a problem here to resolve. This is the story has come to, they have the awareness of good and evil, but they're not God. This is God. So how's this going to sort out? How is this conflict going to be resolved? Well, there's a legacy here, and I'm not going to say go into Adam and Eve's personal thing. I talk about humans in general. What I call the legacy of being like God in the sense of knowing good and evil, but we're actually not God. So our human nature, if you're a human, we have, I'll call it the bias, inclination, tendency, habit. We do make value judgments, as I had in one of those opening slides. This was good. This was great. This was awful. This was terrible. This is wonderful. We do make value judgments, which is an attribute of God. But unlike God, we don't know what's good or bad. So we value things as good or evil, good, bad, favorable, by what we have available to us. Let's say physical, financial, social, emotional measures. This is inconvenient. This is costly. This is painful. This is embarrassing. This is, just messes up my life. So we take the facts of what happened and put a value judgment. Remember, the value judgment is something added. It doesn't change what happened. It's just this label that gets put on it, or emotional label. And the fact is that a lot of what we call evil is likely to be good in God's view. And now we're getting to that familiar territory that I said in the blurb for today's class we would get to when we're done. So let's summarize all this and then move into the kind of the practical ideas. But before that, questions. Did that lose anybody so far? Everybody, any specific, just on kind of following this? We'll have time for questions afterwards, because I think we're moving at a good pace here.
So David, how was it that, help me draw the connection between Adam and Eve eating of this tree and them knowing good and evil. Like
yeah,
what?
that's coming up.
Okay, all
I
right.
think it's in this slide. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Okay. If it's not here, I'll make sure I go over that again because I have a highlighted point on that, I think. Okay. So Adam and Eve, they when God says they become one of us, they attempted to, they didn't really, but they attempted to become limitless creatures on their own by saying, no, we can eat of this tree. It's okay. They make their own limits. No, that ruptures their relationship to Creator God. He's only the unlimited Creator, is limitless. They are limited. So that's kind of the first step of trying to usurp God's prerogative of, or the God's not prerogative, but God's uh, picture, his tangible demonstration of limitlessness was, you know, here's this tree, don't eat it. That means you're limited, I'm not. And that was ruptured. Or, yeah, the act disrupted the relationship between creator and created. The legacy of this is they knew good and evil, but they're still limited creatures. That didn't change. Nothing changed. What did change is they became aware that they had done something wrong and they were going to suffer for it. And I said, you know, limitations, the idea of limited is a key word here. And this is the other one. I call it a surrogate understanding of good and evil. We don't have God's perspective on good and evil. That's something that only an eternal being knows. But we'd have to judge by our own limits within a mortal frame, and that comes to some, say, pretty, as I say, mortal parameters, like how much did it cost? Does it hurt? Only God knows what's good for us. What advances go way back to those statements I said about Genesis 1. What made it good when God said something was good? It was good because it was moving towards God's purpose. God knows what moves our lives towards his purpose from his eternal, unlimited perspective. That is God's domain and not to be transgressed or entered into by people making judgments and two, doing it the wrong way. Does that help, Steve? Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
I think it does. I mean, when we define good, we tend to define it as what's, when I say we, you know, mankind, we tend to identify what's good as what's good for me and my family and my tribe,
In the
even if it's at the
in the
expense of you and
immediate,
your family and your tribe.
yeah, in the immediate moment.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is God defines good not in the immediate moment, but in the eternal moment. What's moving us and his creation towards the fulfillment of his plan.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks, David. I could.
So because this relationship was corrupted, disrupted, you know, some word in there, broken, and God still wants to restore it and to teach us. But the upshot of it is it has to use what we call evil to teach us to be good. And the first instance of this came, of course, in Genesis 3, where God pronounces, you know, we call the judgment or the sentence, you know, about the sweat and the thorns and the thistles and the pain and all that kind of stuff. He said, that's to teach you because you didn't learn, you didn't respect this, to teach you you're a limited being and I'm not. I have to speak to you on your human terms now, which is everything that you think is bad, like weeds in your garden and pain and sweat and all the things that if we're working outside, say, oh, this is horrible, this is bad. No, God says, no, it's good because that's what I'm using to bring you back to me. Therefore, it's good in the same sense that when I created things, I called them good because they're moving towards what I wanted in creation. If the physical creation, God didn't have to deal with them morally. You know, the oceans and the animals, everything just did what God did. With humans, it's different, free will and all the stuff. So God now has to take the extra step. I just can't say, you know, do this and I make it and it's good. Oh, you're going to go this way. So the story continues with us. Genesis 50:20, I call it the iconic statement of God working good from human evil. This is when Joseph uh, comes to, you know, with his brothers and they're talking about all the stuff they did to him. And he says, you know, you meant evil, but God meant this for good. Uh, so let's look at this and ask some of those questions we had before. Were Joseph's brothers' intentions morally evil? I think we'd all agree they wanted to kill him. Okay? We say that was evil in the moral sense. Were their actions unkind to the family? Absolutely. This is what Steve just said. You know, what's good for us? It wasn't good for Jacob. It wasn't good for anybody else. But okay, so that was evil there. Was it physically evil when Joseph went into the pit? We don't know that. I'm guessing it was. Just it said there was no water, and I don't know how long he's there, but it couldn't have been physically fun to been, I don't know, thrown in and pushed down a ramp. There's probably some physical. Certainly, it was emotionally horrible for Joseph because for all he knew, he's going to die of exposure and dehydration in there when he was first thrown in. It's terribly, and he's screaming and they're just eating dinner and ignoring him, and just, you know, horribly emotionally traumatic for the father, you know, for Jacob. So this is evil, 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 evil. Did the brothers suffer emotionally afterwards? Absolutely. We know that. They talk about their guilt at least two occasions. What they thought was the expedient way of getting rid of Joseph and covering it up with the blood-soaked cloak, that weighed on them. So that was emotional evil. So it was evil. Everything about this was evil. Selling him, selling their brother, said it's just evil, bad, 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 right down the line. But then Joseph says, well, you meant evil, and it really was in many respects, but God meant it for good. So that means God's valuation is not ours. And our valuation it's kind of limited. Now, some things we would both agree, the intentions, the moral evil, that's absolutely, you know, certain that anybody would say that, but they did it. But the physical, there's so much about this it's wrong, but yet God says it was good. So there's, then you can take every one of these things too and probably apply it in even greater sense to the crucifixion. You know, everything about it was evil. That the trial, you know, the arrest, the pain, it was bad, 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 but necessary. So God would say, this furthers my plan of redemption. It was good. I could have given this whole class, Marcus Aurelius, of course, one of the great Stoic philosophers, from a Stoic philosophy perspective, the background would be totally different, but a lot of the conclusions are the same. There's nothing, Stoics are very fond of this idea that there's nothing good or bad. It's just what happens. It's only how we react to things that can be labeled good or bad. One statement of this, there's no misfortune, that is, nothing is evil, but to bear it nobly, that is good fortune. So the basis of good in Genesis 1 was advancing God's purpose in creation. And what is God's good for us? How is he advancing his work in us with the new creation? As I just said, it's not as simple as just making trees and whales and things and putting there, and they show up and it's good and they're in place. Dealing with people is a little messier. So God wants in us is developing the fruit of the Spirit, godly character, many ways of putting this faith, love, and so forth. Specifically, when God works with us with adversity and with like what happened to Joseph, this is the familiar territory I talked about in that blurb. We're getting that right. Okay, we know this. We've heard this so many times about the value of trials and why James says, count it all joy when you meet various trials, because why? Because this is how you learn patience and empathy for other people, gratitude for what you do have, dependency on God, trust in God, humility, respecting that relationship of God's limitlessness, priority, what's really important. The only way you can learn these things is through that evil part of that tree of knowledge and good and evil.